Hello, my friends. Today, I will be continuing my series of Jewish studies from the Dearborn Independent. This particular article comes from the July 9th, 1921 edition of the Dearborn Independent, and the title is How Jewish International Finance Functions. The Warburg family and firm divided the world between them and did amazing things which non-Jews could not do. And I'll just jump right into it. Quote, "Such has been the development of international bankers that they can no longer be regarded in their professional capacity as the nationals of any country, entitled to do business under their own government's supervision exclusively. They are really world citizens with worldwide interests, and as such ought to be made amenable to some form of supranational control." End quote. George Petullo in the Saturday Evening Post. Not only did the Jewish financial firm of Kuhn, Loeb, and Company use far-sighted prudence in splitting its political support, one Warburg supporting Wilson, another Warburg supporting Taft, and an unnamed member of the firm supporting Roosevelt, all at one time, as Mr. Paul M. Warburg testified, but it split its activities in several other ways also. The international interests of the Jews comprising this firm are worthy of note. The influence which forced the United States to repudiate a commercial treaty with Russia, while Russia was a friendly country in 1911, and thus to compel all business between the United States and Russia to pass through German Jewish hands, was generated by Jacob H. Schiff. Russia seems to have been the country on which he chose to focus his activities. The full story is told in the Dearborn Independent of January 15th, 1921, under the title, "Taft Once Tried to Resist the Jews and Failed," and is reprinted in Volume 2 of the booklet containing this series. Mr. Schiff's activities consisted in forcing the Congress of the United States to do a thing that was repugnant to the reason and conscience of President Taft, and which he personally refused to do or to recommend. Mr. Schiff left the White House in great anger with the threat, "This means war." It did not mean as much war as it might have, for President Taft acquiesced gracefully in the Jewish victory, and has since been extremely laudatory of them on the public platform. This member handled Russia. Mr. Schiff's firm also helped finance the Japanese war against Russia, and in return desired Japan as a Jewish ally. The wily Japs, however, saw the game and kept their relations with Mr. Schiff to purely business matters, which fact is well worth bearing in mind when reading the widespread propaganda for war with Japan. If you will give particular attention, you will observe that the same interests which are just now engaged in most loudly defending the Jew are most active in spreading anti-Japanese sentiments in this country. The Japanese war with Russia, however, enabled Mr. Schiff to advance his plan to undermine the Russian Empire, as it has now been accomplished by Jewish Bolshevism. With funds provided by him, the basic principles of what is now known as Bolshevism were sown among the Russian prisoners of war in Japan, who were sent back as apostles of destruction. Then followed the horrible murder of Nicholas Romanov Tsar of Russia, with his wife, his crippled son, and his young daughters, the full tale of which has now been told by the Jew who managed the crime. For the part he played in destroying Russia, Mr. Schiff was wildly hailed in New York the night the news came that the emperor had abdicated. Meanwhile, the Jew who was, quote, to take the Tsar's job, end quote, as the common New York ghetto phrase ran, weeks before the event, had left New York to be in waiting. This Jew was passed out of the United States at the request of a very high American personage, whose subservience to the Jews was one of the marvels of the past 7 years. Halted by the British, this Jew was released from their toils at the request of a very high American personage, and thus the Jewish Bolshevik Revolution in Russia, the program of which was made in America, was set in operation without a hitch. Mr. Kuhn handles France and Britain. This whole firm is German-Jewish, its members having originated in Germany. It had German connections. How far it maintained those connections through all subsequent events is a separate question. Mr. Otto Kahn's allotted portion of the world seems to be Great Britain and France. Mr. Kuhn is of German origin, like the rest of the firm, but he has not publicly shown much concern for Germany, as have the other members. Mr. Schiff was once very active for the settlement of a peace on the basis of a victorious Germany. Mr. Paul M. Warburg also had interests, discussion of which is postponed for the present. But Mr. Kuhn succeeded, through the connivance of American authority and the excessive repression of the newspapers, in conveying the impression that by some species of occult separatism he was not, quote, German-minded. Therefore, Mr. Kuhn flits lightly everywhere except Germany. He is sufficiently French to be able to tell in the first column of the first page of Le Matin on what terms America will do business with Europe, and he speaks as one having authority. He is sufficiently British to have thought of standing for the British Parliament, when an unfortunate event made it necessary for him to remain in the United States. Mr. Kuhn sometimes flits farther east into the more Jewish portions of Europe, and his comings and goings are marked by certain changes with which his name remains most ostentatiously disconnected. Mr. Kuhn has very recently been telling France on what terms the United States will help her. There apparently being no other spokesman, Mr. Kuhn's word is accepted as authority. France is one of the most Judaized countries in the world, the haunt of international Jewish financiers who exercise their power, thus saving France the trouble of passing laws, to keep the emigrant Jew out of France, so that France presents the spectacle of being Judaized by Jewish finance and not by immigrant Semitic hordes, and is thus a fit platform from which Mr. Otto Hermann Kuhn may utter his pronouncements. In the last declaration to France, Mr. Kuhn prepares her to expect little by stating that, quote, America is a country of immense resources, but the actual money which the people have at their disposal is comparatively limited. True enough. It was a member of Mr. Kuhn's firm who invented a monetary system which was promised to keep money in more equal relation to wealth. But he goes on telling what America will and will not do, the American people knowing nothing about it meanwhile. Mr. Kuhn discovers with great enthusiasm a place where he thinks American capital can be placed, namely, quote, in the development of the vast and immensely rich colonial empire of France, end quote. Playing them all from one center. And pray, where is that? Any Frenchman will tell you now, in Syria. Syria. Ah, that part of the East where the natives are loudly complaining that the Jews are driving them out contrary to every written and moral law. The Jewish powers have already succeeded in getting French troops over there. Bad blood has been caused between France and Great Britain. The Jews on both sides are playing for the middle, and here is Mr. Otto Kahn himself pledging American capital to the development of the French colonial empire. Talk to any Syrian who knows his country's present status, and he will interpret Mr. Kahn's words very vividly. One of the nicest bits of work Mr. Kuhn has done is to denounce, quote, pro-German propaganda, which, he says, has exasperated Americans in favor of France. Next to committing the United States to an undying admiration of Briand, this is really his finest bit, especially with partner Paul playing the German sympathy string. It is a great international orchestra, this Jewish financial firm. It can play the Star-Spangled Banner, Die Wacht am Rhein, the Marseillaise, and God Save the King in one harmonious rendering, paying obsequious attention to the prejudices of each. Next come the Warburgs. Their interest is, of course, in Germany. Paul stated in his testimony given at the beginning of the World War that he had interests in Hamburg and would dispose of them. The war came on. The Jewish government in the United States was augmented. Mr. Warburg was no mean figure, as previous articles have shown. The Warburgs are 3 in number. Felix M. is the other one in America. He appears but slightly in public affairs, although he is a member of the American Jewish Committee and of the firm of Kuhn, Loeb and Company. His retiring habit, however, does not argue lack of conscience. He was of sufficient consequence, Jewishly, to have bestowed upon him a sort of honorary rabbinical degree of Haber, which entitles him to be known as Haber Rabbi Baruch ben Moshe. He is the only Jew in America upon whom the title has ever been conferred. Max Warburg represents the family in its native land. Max Warburg had as much to do with the German war government as his family and financial colleagues in America had to do with the United States war government. As has been recounted in the press the world over, the brother from America and the brother from Germany both met at Paris as government representatives in determining the peace. There were so many Jews in the German delegation that it was known by the term kosher, also as, quote, the Warburg delegation. And there were so many Jews in the American delegation that the delegates from the minor countries of Europe looked upon the United States as a Jewish country, which, through unheard of generosity, had elected a non-Jew as its president. Max Warburg is an interesting character also, as regards the establishment of Bolshevism in Russia. The Jews had several objectives in the war, and one of them was get Russia. To this end, the German Jews worked very assiduously. Because Russia was a member of the Allies, the work of German Jews was made the easier. But the fact that Russia was an ally made no difference with the Jews who were resident in allied countries. Win or lose, Russia must be destroyed. It is the testimony of history that it was not so much the German military prowess as the Jewish intrigue that accomplished the downfall of that empire. In this work, Max Warburg was a factor. His bank is noted in a dispatch published by the United States government as being one whence funds were forwarded to Trotsky for use in destroying Russia. Always against Russia, not for German reasons, but for Jewish reasons, which in this particular instance coincided. Warburg and Trotsky against Russia. Comes close to Bolshevism again. Poor John Spargo, who ought to know better, denies all this, while every American who comes back from Russia, even those who went over there pro-Bolshevik, yes, and turned Jews themselves, proclaim it. The crushing fact is that Bolshevism is not only Jewish in Russia and in America, but it is Jewish in the higher regions of Jewry, where better things ought to exist. Take Walter Rathenau, a German Jew on the plane of the Warburgs. Rathenau was the inventor of the Bolshevik system of centralization of industry, material, and money. The Soviet government asked Rathenau directly for the plans and received them directly from him. Max Warburg's bank held the money. Walter Rathenau's mind held the plans, which makes it a pertinent question. If Bolshevism can be so Jewish outside of Russia, what hinders it being Jewish inside Russia? It is a most significant fact that, as in Washington, the most constant and privileged visitors to the White House were Jews, so in Berlin, the only private telephone wire to the Kaiser was owned by Walter Rathenau. Not even the Crown Prince could reach the Kaiser, except through the ordinary telephone connections. It was the same in London. It was the same in Paris. It was the same in Petrograd, in Russia, which so persecuted the race that controlled it then and controls it now. All in the Schiff, Loeb, Warburg family. Now, this sketchy outline of the internationalism of the firm of Kuhn, Loeb and Company is not offered as the result of keen research, for the facts are found on the very surface of the matter for anyone to see. What is revealed by research is this: whether Mr. Schiff's interest in Russia had underground features which affected the welfare of the nations, whether Mr. Kahn's flitting missions here and there, which he made with great freedom during the war, were wholly taken up with the business announced in the public notices, and whether Mr. Warburg, whose interest in Germany has not abated, to judge from his recent utterances, was able to retain complete neutrality of mind during the war. These are questions of value. Obviously, they are not easy to answer, but they can be answered. It was a family enterprise, this international campaign. Jacob Schiff swore to destroy Russia. Paul M. Warburg was his brother-in-law. Felix Warburg was his son-in-law. Max Warburg of Hamburg, banker, of the Bolsheviks, was thus brother-in-law to Jacob Schiff's wife and daughter. Speaking of the far-sighted manner in which the house of Kuhn, Loeb and Company disposes itself over world affairs, there is also the curious fact that in this Jewish firm is one who goes to a Christian church, a most heinous thing for a Jew to do. split 3 ways in American politics, and as many ways as international matters require, we find this firm split 2 ways with regard to religion. Mr. Kuhn professes, at least he attends, a Christian church, and is accounted an adherent of it. Yet he is not ostracized. His name is not taboo. The Jews do not curse him. He is not denounced as a renegade. The Jews have not buried him out of mind, as they do others who desert the faith. This presents a strange situation when it is considered. Not to recount again the horror and reprehension and active antagonism with which Jews view such a desertion, suffice it to say that there is no greater marvel than that of Jacob H. Schiff retaining in the firm of Kuhn, Loeb and Company a renegade Jew. Oops. Excuse the interruption. He could not have done it. Every fiber of his intensely Jewish nature would have rebelled against it. Yet, there it is. Without going further into this ingenious system of covering all vital points from one center, enough has been said to show one busy Jewish financial firm with which political matters, national and international, is almost a profession. The family of Warburg, high in the controlling group of 2 countries, and enemy of countries at that. The family of Warburg, high in the negotiations of world peace and the discussions of a League of Nations. The family of Warburg, now advising the world from both sides of the earth what to do next. It was probably with more reason than the general public surmised that a New York paper printed during the peace conference an article headed, quote, "Watch the Warburgs." The fact seems to be that, as Mr. Patullo is quoted as saying at the head of this article, the international financiers have been so engrossed in world money that the sense of national responsibility sometimes becomes blurred in their minds. They desire everything, war, negotiations, and peace, to be conducted in such a way as to react favorably on the money market. For that is their market. Money is what they buy and sell. And because money has no fixed price, it is a market which offers the widest opportunity for the trickster and swindler. One cannot play such tricks with stone or corn or metals, but with money as the commodity, everything is possible. Looking forward to the next war. Mr. Warburg is already very much interested about the treatment to be accorded foreign securities in the next war. Readers of the daily newspapers may recall that recently a demand was made for the gold in the Reichsbank, which was resisted on the ground that the Reichsbank, although the Central Bank of Germany, was really a private concern, just as Paul Warburg said it was, and just as he has insisted that our own Federal Reserve System should be, and which it is. There is far-sighted wisdom in that, with a view to possible defeat in war. Mr. Warburg is apparently quite disapproving of the treatment accorded alien enemy property, quote, by some countries. He quotes a French banker throughout, nationality not stated, and drives home his point. The French banker used as an illustration a possible war between England and France. This was only last year, and said that the bankers in each country would proceed to withdraw their mutual balances and securities for fear of confiscation, and that such a course would precipitate a panic. To which Mr. Warburg adds, quote, "I think that our bankers ought carefully to study this very serious question. We have nothing to gain and much to lose by joining in a policy of disregarding the rights of private property. We shall probably, in the course of time, become the largest owners of foreign securities and properties, which would become endangered in case we were drawn into war. To me, however, it is of greater interest that nothing be done that might stand in the way of making the United States the gold reserve country of the world." End quote. Such talk passes with too little scrutiny. It bears a strong reflection of recent events which should not be overlooked. Moreover, it presents a grandiose vision which is supposed to command instant agreement because of its appeal to superficial national pride and selfish ambition. If what Mr. Warburg says is an intimation that the international Jews are planning to move their money market to the United States, it is safe to say that the United States does not want it. We have the warning of history as to what this would mean. It has meant that, in turn, Spain, Venice, Great Britain, or Germany received the blame and suspicion of the world for what the Jewish financiers have done. It is a most important consideration that most of the national animosities that exist today arose out of resentment against what the Jewish money power did under the camouflage of national names. Quote, "The British did this," or "the Germans did this," when it was the international Jew who did it, the nations being but the marked spaces on his checkerboard. Today, around the world, the blaming word is heard. The United States did this. If it were not for the United States, the world would be in better shape. The Americans are a sordid, greedy, cruel people. Why? Well, because the Jewish money power is largely centered here and is making money out of both our immunity and Europe's distress, playing one against the other, and because so many of the so-called American businessmen abroad today are not Americans at all. They are Jews, and in many cases as misrepresentative of their own race as they are of the Americans. The United States does not want the transfer of all Judean to this soil. We do not desire to stand as a gold god above the nations. We would serve the nations, and we would protect them, but we would do both in the basis of real values, not in the name or under the sign of gold. On the one hand, Mr. Warburg recites pitiful facts about Germany in order to raise sympathy for her, and on the other hand, he stimulates the gold lust of the United States. The plight of Germany is entirely due to the forces from which the United States has only narrowly escaped, and to hearken to international Jewish plans for the rehabilitation of Germany is to be in danger of approving plans which will fasten Jewish domination more strongly on that unhappy country than it is now. Germany has paid dearly for her Jews. The Warburg voice that speaks for her would seem indeed to be the voice of Jacob, but the hand that proposes financial dealings is that of Esau. Samples of Jewish internationalism. The internationalism of the Warburgs is no longer in doubt and cannot be denied. Felix Warburg hung on to the Hamburg connection longer than did Paul, but the breakage of either was probably perfunctory. At the same time that Felix left the Hamburg firm of his brother Max, Mr. Stern also left the Frankfurt firm of Stern, and both became very active on the Allies' side, taking sides against the German nation as lustily as anyone could. Impossible, say those who fancy that a German Jew is a German. not at all impossible. The Jew's loyalty is to the Jewish nation, what the Jew himself refers to as his cover nationality may count or not as he himself elects. This statement is always met with frothing wrath by the Jews' Gentile fronts in the purchased pro-Jewish press. But here is an example. Do you remember The Beast of Berlin, that lurid piece of war propaganda? You did not perhaps know that its producer was a German Jew, Karl Lemel. His German birth did not prevent him making money out of his film, and his film does not prevent him annually going back in his state to his birthplace. This year he goes accompanied by Abe Stern, his treasurer, Lee Kolmar, his director, and Harry Reichenbach, a list of names duplicable in any movie group. Messrs. Stern and Warburg of Frankfurt and Hamburg respectively, and away from home perhaps only temporarily, were not concerned about the fate of the Huns, but they were immensely concerned about the fate of Jewish money power in Germany. To indicate how blind the public has been to the inter-allied Jewish character of much of the world's important international financial activity, note this from the Living Age earlier in the year. Quote, according to the Svensk Handelstidning, the recent American loan of $5 million to Norway was really the outcome of an agreement between the Hamburg firm of Warburg and Company and the New York bankers Kuhn and Loeb. It is regarded as a significant sign of the times that a German firm should be responsible for an American loan to a neutral country. The conditions subject to which this money was borrowed are not regarded as very favorable to Norway, and no marked effect on the rate of exchange between the two countries has followed. End quote. Note, in the light of all the statements made about Kuhn, Loeb, and Co., and the Warburgs in particular, the assumption in the above quotation that the transaction was really between a German and an American firm. It was principally an arrangement between the Warburgs themselves in a family council. But the loan will pass in Norway as an American loan, and the fact that the terms of the loan, quote, are not regarded as very favorable to Norway, will react upon Scandinavian opinion of this country. It goes without saying that, quote, no marked effect on the rate of exchange between the two countries has followed, end quote, for that would not be the object of such a loan. The dislocation of exchange is not unprofitable. It would be most interesting to know in how far Kuhn, Loeb, and Company has endeavored to readjust the rate of exchange. In Germany, to whisper was verboten. During the war, Kuhn, Loeb, and Company made a loan to the city of Paris. Considerable German comment was occasioned by this, naturally, and it is very well worthy of record that in the city of Hamburg, where Max Warburg does business, the chief of police issued this order, quote, further mention in the press of loans made by the firm of Kuhn, Loeb, and Company to the city of Paris, and unfavorable comments thereon are forbidden, end quote. The following story is vouched for as reliable, and if in one or two minor details it does not represent the exact fact, it is a trustworthy illustration of how certain things were done. Quote, a Jewish international banking corporation bought up the mining and other similar concessions of Yugoslavia, and consequently, the policy pushed at the peace conference was that which was most convenient for that group. An understanding on the Fiume question was in progress between Wilson and Nitti. Certain concessions had been agreed upon, and Wilson was willing to negotiate when Oscar Strauss and one of the Warburgs appeared on the scene. Wilson changed his attitude overnight and afterward insisted on the Yugoslavia solution of the problem. The way in which concessions had been bought through that territory was a disgrace, and observers expected that it would play an important part at the peace conference. End quote. The financiers are not the only international Jews in the world. The revolutionary Jews of all countries and none are international also. They have seized upon the idea of Christian internationalism, which means amity between nations, and have used it as a weapon with which to weaken nationality. They know as well as anyone that there can be no internationalism except on the basis of strong nationalism, but they count on cover words to advance their plan. Enough transpired between the lower and higher Jewish groups of every large center during the war to render it imperative that Jewry confess, repent, and repudiate the madness that has ruled it, or else boldly assert and espouse it before the world. Certainly, enough has transpired to render it desirable that the American people look again into the purposes of those Jews who were instrumental in reorganizing our financial system at a most critical time in the world's history. Max Warburg was apparently strong enough to suppress German discussion of his brother's activity in America. The Warburgs at present, resident in America, must suffer it, therefore, that American comment be made as full as need be. That, my friends, is the end of how Jewish international finance functions. Thank you for watching.